Welcome to Timeless Dreams. Subscribe, relax, and drift into sleep with the gentle stories of history.
Tonight, we travel back thousands of years to a land carved by a river and crowned by the sun, a civilization that gave the world the pyramids, mummies, and gods who seem to watch your every move. Ancient Egypt, a name that feels like it belongs in both history books and legends. But tonight, we're not here for the tourist brochure version. Forget the golden masks behind glass in a museum or the perfectly restored temples. Tonight, you and I are stepping barefoot into the sand, breathing the dry air, and living just one day as an ordinary person in this ancient world. Let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. Life here isn't the glamorous eternity promised in hieroglyphs. It's a dance between survival and the unyielding desert, where comfort is a rare luxury, and the smallest mistake can make your day feel longer than the reign of a pharaoh. Before we step into this world, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan to imitate the Nile breeze, and settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like, because in a few moments, we'll leave the modern world behind entirely. We start in a small village along the Nile, sometime around 1200 BCE. The smell of wet earth and silt fills your nostrils. The river has recently flooded, leaving behind rich black soil, the very lifeline of Egypt. This is the time when planting begins, when the people's hopes for survival are tied to the rhythm of the river. The morning mist rises from the riverbanks, villagers carrying baskets of seeds, a water buffalo walking slowly past. You wake before the sun, not because you're eager, but because in this world, the day forces itself upon you. A chorus of ibis birds calls out, and the faint light starts to creep through the open doorway of your mud brick home. Your bed is a woven mat on the floor, your pillow just a block of wood carved to cradle your neck. Linen sheets cling to you in the humid air, offering little comfort. Outside, the desert sky shifts from deep blue to a pale gold. By the time you step outside, the temperature is already rising. There are no curtains to block the light, no glass windows, just open doorways and reed screens. Privacy is a concept that exists only for the wealthy. Breakfast is humble. A piece of flatbread baked the evening before, maybe a smear of date paste if you're lucky. Water comes from the river, but it's cloudy with a taste of silt and life. You drink because you must. The desert sun will demand more from your body than you can imagine. And that sun, oh, it doesn't simply shine here. It presses down on you like a god testing your endurance. By mid-morning, it's hot enough to bake clay bricks in the open air. You wear a simple linen tunic, so thin it's almost transparent, but even that feels heavy as sweat clings to your skin. Your day is dictated not by the clock, but by the Nile and the orders of those above you. The pharaoh is said to be a living god, but for you, his power is felt through the tax collectors, the scribes who measure your grain, and the overseers who decide how much of your harvest is yours to keep. Work is constant. Maybe you are in the fields, planting barley under the unforgiving sun. Maybe you are carrying water in clay jars, balancing them on your shoulders until your muscles scream. Or perhaps you are among those drafted to labor on the pharaoh's projects, moving limestone blocks, carving hieroglyphs, or transporting supplies. There is no choice in this matter. The pharaoh is the living embodiment of the gods. To refuse is unthinkable. So you join the lines of laborers, pushing and pulling sledges over the sand, voices rising in rhythmic chants to keep pace. The work is grueling. Your shoulders ache from the strain, your palms are raw, and every breath brings the taste of hot dust. The overseers watch with stern eyes, measuring not just the progress of the work, but the willpower of those doing it. The midday break, if it comes, is short and simple. You retreat to whatever shade you can find: a palm tree, the side of a mud brick wall, the shadow of a cart. You drink from a clay jar, the water warm but still precious. You drink because you must. The desert sun will demand more from your body than you can imagine. And that sun, oh, it doesn't simply shine here. It presses down on you like a god testing your endurance. By mid-morning, it's hot enough to bake clay bricks in the open air. You wear a simple linen tunic, so thin it's almost transparent, but even that feels heavy as sweat clings to your skin. The day is dictated not by the clock, but by the Nile and the orders of those above you. The pharaoh is said to be a living god, but for you, his power is felt through the tax collectors, the scribes who measure your grain, and the overseers who decide how much of your harvest is yours to keep. Work is constant. Maybe you are in the fields, planting barley under the unforgiving sun. Maybe you are carrying water in clay jars, balancing them on your shoulders until your muscles scream. Or perhaps you are among those drafted to labor on the pharaoh's projects, moving limestone blocks, carving hieroglyphs, or transporting supplies. There is no choice in this matter. The pharaoh is the living embodiment of the gods. To refuse is unthinkable. So you join the lines of laborers, pushing and pulling sledges over the sand, voices rising in rhythmic chants to keep pace. The work is grueling. Your shoulders ache from the strain, your palms are raw, and every breath brings the taste of hot dust. The overseers watch with stern eyes, measuring not just the progress of the work, but the willpower of those doing it. The midday break, if it comes, is short and simple. You retreat to whatever shade you can find: a palm tree, the side of a mud brick wall, the shadow of a cart. You drink from a clay jar, the water warm but still precious. You drink because you must. The desert sun will demand more from your body than you can imagine. And that sun, oh, it doesn't simply shine here. It presses down on you like a god testing your endurance. The midday break, if it comes, is short and simple. You retreat to whatever shade you can find: a palm tree, the side of a mud brick wall, the shadow of a cart. You drink from a clay jar, the water warm but still precious. But rest cannot last. The project looms larger than any individual. The pharaoh's temples, tombs, and monuments are meant to stand for eternity, and eternity does not pause for fatigue. The sun begins to sink slowly westward, but the air remains heavy with heat. Every motion feels deliberate, drawn out by the weight of the day. You move not because you have the energy, but because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means trouble. In this world, labor is not just work, but survival, duty, and in some strange way, faith. Each stroke of the hoe, each carved line in stone, each brick laid is part of a larger order that has existed for centuries. And though your name may never be written in the temple walls, your hands help build them. As the last rays of the sun sink beyond the horizon over the Nile, the blistering heat of the day gives way to the cool embrace of the Egyptian night. But comfort is not a guarantee here. In ancient Egypt, survival was never a simple matter of shelter and food. It was an intricate dance between nature, the gods, and the unyielding will of the pharaoh. In the darkness, the Nile becomes a ribbon of moonlight. For the people who lived along its banks, it was more than just a river. It was the heartbeat of their world. Without it, Egypt's vast desert would be a lifeless wasteland. But dependence on the Nile came with risks. A low flood meant famine. A high flood could sweep away homes and fields. Every year, the people waited anxiously, watching the water rise, hoping for the perfect balance. The Nile is more than just water. It is hopi, the god of fertility whose generous floods bring life to the fields. The sun is Ra, crossing the sky in his solar bark, bringing warmth but also demanding respect. The stars are souls, sailing across the night in the company of Osiris. The evening sun slips lower, spilling molten gold across the horizon. In ancient Egypt, twilight was a moment of quiet reverence, when the living retreated to their homes, and the temples and tombs of the dead grew heavy with shadows. For the priests who served in the mortuary complexes, this was a sacred hour. The air would be warm but cooling, scented with the last breath of sun-baked earth, carrying the faint tang of incense drifting from the inner sanctums. These men were the silent watchers, guardians of rituals that, they believed, kept the universe itself in balance. You might imagine this role as serene, but it was anything but easy.
A civilization that gave the world the pyramids, mummies, and gods who seemed to watch your every move. Ancient Egypt, a name that feels like it belongs in both history books and legends. But tonight, we're not here for the tourist brochure version. Forget the golden masks behind glass in a museum or the perfectly restored temples. Tonight, you and I are stepping barefoot into the sand, breathing the dry air, and living just one day as an ordinary person in this ancient world. Let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. Life here isn't the glamorous eternity promised in hieroglyphs. It's a dance between survival and the unyielding desert, where comfort is a rare luxury, and the smallest mistake can make your day feel longer than the reign of a pharaoh. Before we step into this world, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to imitate the Nile breeze, and settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like, because in a few moments we'll leave the modern world behind entirely. We start in a small village along the Nile, sometime around 1200 BCE. The smell of wet earth and silt fills your nostrils. The river has recently flooded, leaving behind rich black soil, the very lifeline of Egypt. This is the time when planting begins, when the people's hopes for survival are tied to the rhythm of the river. You wake before the sun, not because you're eager, but because in this world the day forces itself upon you. A chorus of ibis birds calls out, and the faint light starts to creep through the open doorway of your mud brick home. Your bed is a woven mat on the floor, your pillow just a block of wood carved to cradle your neck. Linen sheets cling to you in the humid air, offering little comfort. Outside, the desert sky shifts from deep blue to a pale gold. By the time you step into the open, the temperature is already rising. There are no curtains to block the light, no glass windows, just open doorways and reed screens. Privacy is a concept that exists only for the wealthy. Breakfast is humble, a piece of flat bread baked the evening before, maybe a smear of date paste if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, it's just bread and water, and the hope that the day will be kinder than yesterday. There's no time to linger. The rhythm of life here is dictated by the sun and the Nile. Farmers head out early, tools over their shoulders, while artisans open their workshops to catch the morning light. Children run errands, carrying jugs of water, gathering reeds, or chasing stray goats from the vegetable plots. Already, the air is warming. You feel it on your skin, the desert's subtle warning that by midday, it will be punishing. Your linen tunic, loose and airy, offers little defense. There's no sunscreen, no hat wide enough to shield you fully. Just the hope that your skin, darkened and weathered by years under the sun, will endure another day. Even in these first hours, survival is a balancing act. You need enough water to last until your next break, but carrying too much slows you down. The Nile is your lifeline, but it's also unpredictable. Its flooding can bless or destroy. The morning passes quickly in a blur of small labors. You fetch water in clay jars, bending low to fill them without slipping into the muddy banks. You tend to the small garden outside your home, pulling weeds that threaten your precious vegetables. You greet neighbors, not idly, because cooperation is essential here. A strong community means a better chance at surviving lean times. By mid-morning, the temperature already flirts with the limits of comfort. Your skin is damp with sweat, and the light is almost blinding, reflecting off the pale sand. You take a deep breath, knowing that the hardest part of the day still lies ahead. The morning was just the opening act. The sun is your ruler now, just as much as the pharaoh. And as its power grows, so does the demand on your body and your spirit. The morning light turns harsh quickly in Egypt. By the time the sun climbs to its zenith, shadows grow short, and the heat presses down like a stone. This is the true test of endurance, the long hours of labor that shape every muscle, every callus, and every weary night. If you are a farmer, your world revolves around the land. Your hands grip a wooden hoe, its blade worn from countless seasons. The soil, dark from the Nile's recent flood, is rich but heavy, clinging to the tool as you dig furrows. Beside you, neighbors work in silence, their focus sharpened by necessity. Words are wasted energy under this sun. For artisans, the heat does not excuse the work. Inside a modest workshop, the air is thick with dust and the smell of worked wood, wet clay, or smelted copper. A potter shapes vessels for storing grain. A weaver's fingers dance across a simple loom. A scribe leans over a roll of papyrus, his reed pen scratching symbols that will outlast him by centuries. Then there are the pharaoh's projects, the great undertakings that consume manpower from every corner of the kingdom. You might be called away from your fields for months, even years, to haul limestone blocks, carve hieroglyphs, or transport supplies. There's no choice in this matter. The pharaoh is the living embodiment of the gods. To refuse is unthinkable. So you join the lines of laborers, pushing and pulling sledges over the sand, voices rising in rhythmic chants to keep pace. The work is grueling. Your shoulders ache from the strain, your palms are raw, and every breath brings the taste of hot dust. The overseers watch with stern eyes, measuring not just the progress of the work, but the willpower of those doing it. The midday break, if it comes, is short and simple. You retreat to whatever shade you can find, a palm tree, the side of a mud brick wall, or the shadow of a cart. There you drink from a clay jar, the water warm but still precious. Perhaps you share a small loaf of bread, tearing it into rough chunks to pass around. But rest cannot last. The project looms larger than any individual. The pharaoh's temples, tombs, and monuments are meant to stand for eternity, and eternity does not pause for fatigue. The sun begins to sink slowly westward, but the air remains heavy with heat. Every motion feels deliberate, drawn out by the weight of the day. You move not because you have the energy, but because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means trouble. In this world, labor is not just work, it is survival, duty, and in some strange way, faith. Each stroke of the hoe, each carved line in stone, each brick laid is part of a larger order that has existed for centuries. And though your name may never be written in the temple walls, your hands help build them. By late afternoon, the light softens, though the heat still lingers. Your shoulders feel as if they've carried the sun itself all day, and your legs ache with the weight of hours spent on your feet. But there is comfort in knowing the day's hardest labor is behind you. The walk home is slow, measured, not by choice, but by necessity. The body no longer hurries, it simply moves.
You pass others along the narrow dirt paths, neighbors, friends, strangers, all sharing the same quiet exhaustion. Back in the village, the air is alive with activity. Women kneel over grinding stones, turning grain into flour for the evening meal. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone blends with the laughter of children who play in the cooling air before being called inside. You wash your face and hands in a clay basin, the water tepid from the day's heat, but refreshing all the same. In a place where every drop is precious, this small act feels like a luxury. As evening falls, the smell of cooking fills the village. Lentil stew bubbles in clay pots, bread bakes over open fires, and dried fish sizzles on flat stones. Families gather around low tables or sit on woven mats, passing bowls and tearing bread by hand. The conversation drifts easily. News from the fields, whispers of upcoming festivals, perhaps stories of the gods told to wide-eyed children. These tales are more than entertainment. They are threads that weave the people together, reminding them of the order the gods have placed on the world. As the food is gone and the bowls are rinsed clean in the Nile's edge, the night begins to settle fully. Oil lamps flicker inside homes, their flames dancing in the soft breeze. Before sleep, there is time for small rituals. Some offer a silent prayer to Osiris for a safe night and a fertile tomorrow. Others sit outside, watching the stars emerge in the deepening blue sky. In ancient Egypt, the heavens are not empty. They are the realm of gods and the souls of those who have passed. Finally, you return to your mat, laying your head once more on the curved wooden rest. The day has taken its toll, but there is a quiet satisfaction in having endured it. Tomorrow will demand the same, but for now, the night offers peace. In ancient Egypt, the gods were not distant ideas. They were living presences that shaped every sunrise, every flood of the Nile, every breath you took. Theirs was a pantheon both grand and deeply personal, from the mighty Ra, whose blazing sun ruled the sky, to Bes, the squat, cheerful household god who guarded against misfortune. Religion here is not something set aside for one day of the week. It is woven into every act, every decision, every brain harvested, and every word spoken. To live in Egypt is to live under constant divine observation, where luck and disaster alike are interpreted as messages from the unseen. Your home, however humble, likely has a small altar, a painted wooden figure, a clay idol, or a symbolic carving stands in the corner, flanked by incense and offerings. Before you set out for the day, you pause here, not for formality, but for protection. A few whispered words to the God of your choosing might mean the difference between a safe journey and an unlucky accident. At the heart of the spiritual life are the great temples, vast complexes of carved stone, painted walls, and towering pylons. The priests who tend them are keepers of sacred knowledge, mediators between the people and the divine. You may never enter the holiest parts of the temple, but you feel its power in festivals, in public ceremonies, and in the yearly rituals that keep the gods favorable toward Egypt.
Even nature itself is divine. The Nile is not just water. It is Hapi, the god of fertility, whose generous floods bring life to the fields. The sun is Ra, crossing the sky in his solar bark, bringing warmth but also demanding respect. The stars are souls, sailing across the night in the company of Osiris. Superstition thrives here as much as devotion. A carved amulet shaped like an eye may protect you from illness. A small figurine buried under your doorstep might ward off thieves. Children wear protective charms tied with leather cords around their necks, and travelers carry talismans to guard against snakes and scorpions. And yet, belief is not only fear-driven. It offers hope, the assurance that the world is ordered, that the sun will rise because Ra wills it, that the Nile will flood because the gods remember their promises. Even death is not an ending, but a passage to a new existence, provided you live in accordance with Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and harmony. For the ancient Egyptian, faith is both a shield and a map, guiding every step in this life and the one beyond. The year in ancient Egypt is not only marked by the cycles of planting and harvest, but also by the grand festivals that honor the gods. These are days when the ordinary rhythm of survival gives way to music, feasting, and shared joy, moments when the divine is not distant but present, walking among the people. One of the most anticipated is the festival of Opet, celebrated in Thebes. For days, the city comes alive with the movement of priests, dancers, and musicians, all escorting the sacred bark of Amun from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple. Even if you are a simple farmer or artisan, the excitement is irresistible. Closer to home, smaller village festivals still carry the same sense of wonder. Stalls are set up along the streets, selling bread fresh from clay ovens, dried figs, roasted fish, and beer that flows freely from clay jars. Children run between the legs of dancers, laughing as the music swells. There are games and competitions, wrestling matches, boat races along the Nile, and feats of strength to earn small prizes. For the weary laborer, it's a rare chance to feel the body move for pleasure rather than toil. Offerings are central to these events. Families bring loaves of bread, flowers, jars of honey, and baskets of fruit to lay before statues of the gods. Priests burn incense, the smoke curling skyward in twisting patterns, carrying prayers to the heavens. As the last rays of the sun sink beyond the horizon, the blistering heat of the day gives way to the cool embrace of the Egyptian night. But comfort is not a guarantee here. In ancient Egypt, survival was never a simple matter of shelter and food. It was an intricate dance between nature, the gods, and the unyielding will of the pharaoh. In the darkness, the Nile becomes a ribbon of moonlight. For the people who lived along its banks, it was more than a river.
It was the heartbeat of their world. Without it, Egypt's vast desert would be a lifeless wasteland. But dependence on the Nile came with risks. A low flood meant famine. A flood too high could sweep away homes and fields. Every year, the people waited anxiously, watching the water rise, hoping for the perfect balance.
And then there was the work. For the average laborer, life meant an endless cycle of toil under the sun. In the fields, men and women bent their backs to plant and harvest grain. Along the riverbanks, fishermen cast nets into waters teeming with tilapia and Nile perch. Stonecutters, deep in the quarries, hammered away at limestone and granite, their sweat mixing with the dust in the air. This work was not optional, it was duty. Egypt's survival was a collective effort, and the pharaoh's command carried the weight of divine authority. Refusal or failure meant punishment, and justice could be swift and unforgiving. But the greatest price of survival was paid in health. Beneath the grandeur of the temples and the golden tombs, there was suffering. Disease was an ever-present shadow. The Nile brought life, but it also carried parasites and illness. Mosquitoes bred in the shallows. Waterborne infections spread quickly in crowded villages. Ancient Egyptian medicine was advanced for its time. They had herbal remedies, surgical tools, and even dentists, but it was still limited by the knowledge of the age. A wound could fester, a fever could become fatal, and while the wealthy might receive treatment from skilled physicians, most common people relied on folk cures, charms, and prayers to the gods. Religion, in many ways, was survival. Every act, from planting crops to building homes, was done under the gaze of the gods. Temples stood as the spiritual pillars of every community, and offerings were made daily to ensure divine favor. But there was also fear. Fear of offending a deity, fear of the afterlife if proper rites were not observed. The priests held immense power, not only as spiritual leaders, but as custodians of knowledge. They read the flood levels, interpreted omens, and advised the pharaoh. To live in Egypt was to live within this spiritual hierarchy, where fate itself felt dictated by unseen hands. And when night fell, danger did not sleep. Jackals prowled the outskirts of villages. Crocodiles glided silently in the dark waters. Even the desert wind could be cruel, whipping up sandstorms that could blind a man in moments. The safety of home, a mud-brick house with its flat roof and small courtyard, was a fragile barrier against the wild. Families gathered close, sharing stories under the stars, knowing that tomorrow would demand the same relentless labor, the same delicate balance between man, nature, and gods. To survive even a single day in ancient Egypt was to endure heat, hunger, danger, and duty, all while walking in step with the will of the gods. But life here was not only about enduring, it was about building something eternal, and for that, one must step into the world of the pharaoh's most ambitious and dangerous projects. The image of ancient Egypt that many hold is one of grand temples, towering pyramids, and an endless parade of pharaohs adorned in gold. But beneath these marvels of history lay a truth that was far less glamorous. For the ordinary Egyptian, especially those who labored with their hands, the reality was defined by sweat, exhaustion, and the unrelenting demands of the state. In the fertile Nile Valley, life was tethered to the river cycles. Each year, when the floods receded, the rich black silt remained, ready for planting. But the blessing of this fertile land came with obligations. Most peasants were required to work on the vast farmlands owned by temples or the pharaoh himself. Their days began before the sun crept above the horizon, and their tools were simple: wooden plows pulled by oxen, sickles with flint blades, and baskets for carrying soil and seed. These farmers were not free to tend to only their own plots. the pharaoh's officials could summon them for corvée labor, state-mandated service for public works. It was this system that enabled the construction of temples, canals, and yes, even the pyramids. Though contrary to myth, these monumental tombs were not built entirely by slaves, but by a mixture of skilled workers and seasonal laborers. The work was grueling. Imagine hauling limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, across uneven terrain in the relentless desert heat. The dry air seared the lungs, the glare of the sun burned the eyes, and dust clung to sweat-dampened skin until it formed a gritty paste. Those who toiled on building sites were organized into crews, each with a strict hierarchy. Overseers barked instructions, and the pace was set not by comfort, but by the demands of the project. There was no negotiating the workload. It was decreed, and it had to be met. While the elite enjoyed the shade of their estates, laborers endured injuries, heat stroke, and malnutrition. In the workers' village of Deir al-Medina, home to artisans who carved the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, archaeological evidence reveals signs of arthritis, broken bones that never healed properly, and worn joints from repetitive strain. Life expectancy for many laborers was short. Dying in your 30s or 40s was common. Food rations for workers were basic. Bread, onions, and beer were staples. Beer, though mildly alcoholic, was more about nutrition and hydration than intoxication. It was thick, almost porridge-like, and provided calories needed for long hours of work. Meat was rare for the common laborer, often reserved for festival days or as rewards for exceptional work. The punishment for disobedience or slow work could be severe. Whippings were a known deterrent, and records show officials meticulously noting workers' attendance, absences, and performance. Even illness might not excuse absence for long. Workers were expected to recover quickly or face consequences. Yet despite the hardships, the Egyptians left behind evidence that they took pride in their craftsmanship. The alignment of massive blocks, the precision of carved hieroglyphs, and the vivid colors in tomb paintings all speak to a culture where skill and labor were deeply valued, even if the workers themselves did not share equally in the prosperity they helped create. And so, when we marvel at the grandeur of ancient Egypt, it is worth remembering that every block of stone, every carved wall, every painted ceiling was born of the sweat and endurance of countless unnamed individuals, people who lived and died far from the glory their labor created. The sun climbs higher over the endless sands, and the golden light spills onto the slow-moving ribbon of the Nile. We leave the chatter of the market behind and move closer to the water's edge, where Egypt's heartbeat flows silently yet powerfully. The Nile is more than just a river. It is the giver of life. Without it, there would be no Egypt, no grand temples, no bustling villages, no monumental history carved into stone. For those who lived here thousands of years ago, the river was a sacred lifeline. Each year, its waters would rise and flood the surrounding land, coating the soil in rich, dark silt. This was the miracle that allowed crops to grow in a place where otherwise only sand and stone would reign. Villagers wake before the heat grows unbearable. Along the banks, men and women tend to fields of barley, immer wheat, and flax. Bare feet press into the damp earth, the scent of mud and greenery heavy in the air. The tools they use are simple: wooden plows pulled by oxen, sickles with flint blades, but their knowledge of the seasons, the soil, and the river's moods is nothing but primitive. The Nile is also a place of connection. Narrow boats, carved from acacia wood and bound together with rope, glide across the surface, carrying goods between villages. Papyrus bundles are stacked neatly on deck, baskets of dried fish tied securely, jars of beer and wine sealed with clay stoppers. Children chase each other along the banks, laughing, their feet splashing in the shallows. But the river is not without danger. Crocodiles, their eyes just breaking the surface, lurk in the reeds. Hippopotamuses, territorial and surprisingly aggressive, can overturn small boats if provoked. And yet these waters remain a source of endless devotion. Priests offer prayers to Hapi, the god of the inundation, thanking him for the annual floods that keep famine at bay. As the day wears on, the sun burns brighter. Farmers rest in the shade of palm trees, chewing on dates or sipping cool water from clay jars. In the distance, women stand knee-deep in the shallows, washing linen by beating it against smooth stones. The rhythm of life here is slow but constant, tied to the river's flow. At dusk, the Nile transforms. The air cools, the light softens, and the water reflects the colors of the sky. Deep oranges fading into purples. Fishermen set out with nets, their silhouettes dark against the shimmering surface. Lamps flicker along the shore as families gather for the evening meal. Bread, fresh from clay ovens, vegetables stewed with herbs, and perhaps a portion of grilled fish.
The night along the Nile is peaceful, but always with an undercurrent of respect. The people know the river is both a blessing and a force to be reckoned with. They live by its rules, adjusting their lives to its cycles, never daring to take its gifts for granted. The Egyptian sun does not merely rise, it asserts itself. Even as evening approaches, the stones still hold the heat of the day, radiating it back into the air as though the desert refuses to let the world cool. In the city, narrow streets are cloaked in a deep orange haze, shadows stretching long, yet the warmth clings to you like a second skin. The Nile glimmers in the distance, reflecting the dying light in fractured waves, and beyond it, the horizon bleeds into shades of copper and crimson. There is no escape from the temperature. In the countryside, farmers return from the fields drenched in sweat, their linen garments damp against their backs. They have been bent under the relentless glare since the first breath of dawn, their skin leathered from years of such toil. In homes, walls of mud brick offer little relief. Inside, the air is still, heavy, unmoving. The very act of breathing feels like drawing fire into your lungs.
And yet, for them, this was not an extraordinary trial. It was simply life, a rhythm of endurance, patience, and adaptation. The body adjusted to survive, or it did not. For you, however, the ancient Egyptian summer would not be a challenge you could train for in days. It would be an unrelenting, suffocating test that your modern comforts have left you ill-prepared to pass. The desert does not forgive weakness, and in the world of the pharaohs, weakness was not something one could afford. The Egyptian sun had barely risen above the horizon when healers began their rounds, moving from home to home with baskets of herbs, jars of honey, and strange-looking instruments fashioned from copper and bronze. Ancient Egyptian medicine, to modernize, was a strange blend of advanced observation and deep superstition. While they were far ahead of many civilizations in anatomy, surgery, and herbal remedies, much of their medical practice was also intertwined with magic and religious ritual. For the people of ancient Egypt, illness was not just a physical affliction, it was a spiritual imbalance. If you fell ill, it might be blamed on the wrath of a god, the influence of an angry spirit, or the workings of a curse. A doctor, known as a sunwi, might examine your symptoms, but they would also consult magical texts for incantations to drive away the sickness. Many remedies were surprisingly effective: garlic for infections, honey as a natural antiseptic, willow bark for pain. But then there were treatments that would make any modern patient hesitate. Powdered ostrich eggshell might be mixed into a drink to treat stomach issues. And for certain fevers, crocodile dung wrapped in linen could be applied as a poultice. While some of these mixtures may have had antibacterial qualities, others posed more risks than benefits. For injuries, Egyptian medicine could be both advanced and terrifying. Fractures were often treated with splints made from reeds or wooden strips, secured with linen, and sometimes coated with resin to hold them in place. Surgical tools, many of which survive in museum collections today, show that they could drain abscesses, remove foreign objects from wounds, and even attempt primitive forms of surgery. Yet, without our modern understanding of germs, sterilization was non-existent. Every operation carried a high risk of infection, and for many, the cure could be just as dangerous as the illness. Imagine lying on a woven mat while a healer worked with bronze blades and no anesthetic beyond a dose of fermented beer or a herbal sedative. The connection between medicine and religion was inseparable. Temples dedicated to Imhotep, the legendary physician and architect, became centers of healing, where patients would sleep in sacred chambers, hoping to receive cures through dreams sent by the gods. Priests would interpret these dreams and prescribe treatments, blending the spiritual and the physical into one. Some ailments, however, were seen as untreatable. If the body showed signs of wasting away or if strange, unexplainable fits seized the patient, it was often assumed to be the work of evil spirits. In these cases, magical protection spells were written on papyrus, worn as amulets, or recited over the patient while perfumed smoke filled the air. Even childbirth, a common part of life, was fraught with risk. Women gave birth squatting on special birthing bricks, surrounded by midwives who used both herbal remedies and chants to ease the process. While they had a deep knowledge of herbal pain relief, complications like breech births or hemorrhage were often beyond their ability to treat, and many women and infants did not survive. For the average Egyptian, illness was a shadow always waiting at the edge of life. With the Nile's bounty came parasites in the water, diseases from mosquitoes, and infections from even minor wounds. Without antibiotics, vaccines, or sanitation, survival often depended on a combination of luck, resilience, and the favor of the gods.
As the healer finishes his work, the patient sips a bitter herbal mixture while a protective amulet is placed around their neck. Outside, the life of the village continues, but illness lingers in many homes. Yet for all its challenges, medicine in ancient Egypt was more advanced than in many parts of the ancient world, offering at least a glimmer of hope in an age when death was never far away. The ancient Egyptians viewed life not as a straight path ending in death, but as a journey that merely shifted to a different realm. Death was not the final curtain, it was a doorway to eternity. And in their eyes, preparing for that journey was just as important as living itself. This belief shaped their rituals, their art, their architecture, and even the daily lives of the living. For the wealthy and powerful, the journey to the afterlife began long before their final breath. Great stone tombs, whether the towering pyramids or the hidden rock-cut chambers in the Valley of the Kings, were constructed with painstaking care. Every wall was painted with spells, prayers, and scenes designed to guide the soul through the perilous duat, the Egyptian underworld. Inside these tombs lay not only the mummified body, but also an entire collection of possessions, furniture, jewelry, weapons, food, even board games. All of these were meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife, just as they had in the world of the living. Without these provisions, the spirit might wander lost and hungry for eternity. But these grand preparations were not for everyone. The common laborer, farmer, or fisherman could rarely afford such luxury. Their burials were simpler: shallow graves in the desert sand,
perhaps wrapped in linen and accompanied by a few humble offerings, a clay jar, a loaf of bread, or a small amulet for protection. The desert's dry heat often preserved their bodies naturally, though without the intricate care given to those of higher status. In every case, however, the rituals themselves mattered greatly. Priests played a central role, reciting sacred incantations to open the mouth of the deceased, a ceremony believed to restore their ability to breathe, speak, and eat in the next world. Without this ritual, the spirit might be voiceless in the halls of Osiris, unable to plead for entry into the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. The afterlife itself was not guaranteed, it had to be earned. In the Hall of Judgment, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic balance. A heavy heart, burdened with lies or cruelty, would fail the test, and the soul would be devoured by the monstrous Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. Only a light and pure heart could pass on to eternal bliss. For the living, this belief system created an urgency, not just to prepare for death, but to live according to the principles of Ma'at, truth, justice, and harmony. It was a moral compass that guided every aspect of life, from the way neighbors treated one another to the laws enforced by the pharaoh. As the sun sank beyond the western horizon each evening, the Egyptians imagined the sun god Ra beginning his own nightly voyage through the underworld, battling chaos before being reborn at dawn. To them, every day was a reminder of the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth, a pattern they hoped to join forever. The evening sun slips lower, spilling molten gold across the horizon. In ancient Egypt, twilight was a moment of quiet reverence when the living retreated to their homes and the temples and tombs of the dead grew heavy with shadows. For the priests who served in the mortuary complexes, this was a sacred hour. The air would be warm but cooling, scented with the last breath of sun-baked earth, carrying the faint tang of incense drifting from the inner sanctums. These men were the silent watchers, guardians of rituals that, they believed, kept the universe itself in balance. You might imagine this role as serene, but it was anything but easy. In these dimly lit halls, the priests worked tirelessly to ensure the Ka, the life essence of the departed, remained nourished. They recited long, winding chants, their voices low but steady, echoing softly against the limestone walls. If a single word was misspoken, if a sequence was broken, it was believed that the soul could wander, lost forever. The pressure was immense. These weren't mere ceremonies for the dead. They were cosmic duties, binding the living to the afterlife.
Offerings were brought daily: bread, beer, onions, figs, cuts of beef, and jars of fragrant oils. The priests arranged them in precise patterns on low stone tables, murmuring blessings in ancient Egyptian, the language of the gods. These rituals were performed not for a few days or weeks, but for years, decades even, long after the physical body had turned to dust. The wealthy elite paid handsomely to ensure their souls would be fed in perpetuity. For poorer families, these rites were shorter, often ending when payment could no longer be made. Imagine standing there for hours, day after day, in a chamber that never felt the touch of a cool breeze. The air thickened with incense smoke until it clung to your skin and hair. The walls, though beautiful with painted scenes of fields and feasts, seemed to close in. The only light came from the flickering flames, steady but dim, making the air shimmer with heat. A newcomer might feel dizzy, even faint, yet the priests remained composed, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of those who believed the gods themselves were watching. Some of these priests were also trained in the art of embalming, a sacred and exacting craft. Within rooms sealed from public eyes, they worked alongside the embalmers, swathing the deceased in fine linen, tucking amulets between the layers. Each charm had its purpose: to protect the heart, to guide the feet, to shield the eyes from evil. The scent here was not entirely unpleasant, a mingling of resin, myrrh, and natron, but it lingered in the skin, the clothes, and the memory. For someone unaccustomed to it, the smell would follow them for days, no matter how much they bathed. It wasn't just physical endurance that the role demanded, it was mental resilience. Death was constant in their lives, but never casual. Each recitation, each offering was a reminder of mortality and the fragile bridge between worlds. For the Egyptians, this wasn't morbid, it was essential. Life and death were two halves of a whole, and the work of the mortuary priests ensured the cycle continued. As night deepened, the temple complex quieted. The priests withdrew, leaving the offerings for the Ka to consume in the unseen way of the spirit world. Outside, the Nile whispered softly in the darkness, and the scent of lotus flowers drifted in on the breeze. This was the rhythm of the sacred watchers, to labor in the silence of eternity, their work hidden from the eyes of the bustling world beyond the temple gates. To live a day as one of them would test more than your body. It would press upon your spirit, weighing it with the awareness of both the divine and the inevitable. Theirs was a life given not to wealth, nor to fame, but to duty, a duty as unyielding as the stones of the temple itself.
And here lies the truth. In ancient Egypt, you could not escape the pharaoh's will. His authority was carved into the very stones of temples and written in ink upon the records of time. Whether you were a humble potter, a wealthy merchant, or a priest in the innermost sanctum, your life flowed according to the currents he set in motion. But even the power of a living God was bound by unseen forces, the weight of tradition, the expectations of the people, and the ever-present shadow of the afterlife. In the next part, we will step beyond the palace walls and into the sacred world of temples, where the pharaoh's rule intertwined with the eternal will of the gods themselves. As the soft crackle of the fire fades into the background, we leave the noisy bustle of the marketplace behind. The scent of baked bread and the calls of merchants are replaced by the hushed stillness of a room where the very lifeblood of the kingdom, its words, are preserved. In the grand hierarchy of ancient Egyptian society, the scribes held a position of quiet yet immense power. They were neither kings nor generals, yet their influence reached into every chamber of the kingdom's heart. Without them, the pharaoh's decrees would have been whispers lost in the desert wind. Laws would fade into rumor, and the kingdom's stories would dissolve into forgotten sand. Becoming a scribe was not a simple calling, it was a lifelong commitment. Boys who showed intelligence and discipline could be sent to special schools, often attached to temples, where they would spend years learning the sacred art of writing. The Egyptian script was no simple alphabet. It was a complex system of over 700 symbols, some representing sounds, others ideas, still others entire words. Mastery required not just memorization, but an artist's hand and a scholar's mind. The tools of the scribe were modest, yet they commanded respect. A palette of reeds, a supply of ink made from soot and ochre, and a smooth surface of papyrus. Each stroke had to be precise, for a poorly written document was not just a personal failure. It could distort royal orders, confuse land records, or misrepresent religious rituals. Accuracy was survival. Scribes were not only record keepers, they were guardians of Egypt's past and present. They documented everything from crop yields and tax collections to religious hymns and epic tales of gods and kings. In many ways, they were the bridge between the divine and mortal realms, preserving the rituals that ensured the gods' favor and the pharaoh's rule. Yet this role came with burdens. The long hours of meticulous work strained the eyes and cramped the hands. The dim light of oil lamps left many scribes with failing vision as they aged. And while they lived better than most, free from the back-breaking labor of farmers and the dangers faced by soldiers, they were bound by duty to serve faithfully, often under the watchful eye of temple priests or royal officials. Audio cue: gentle scratching of reed pens on papyrus, faint echo of sandals on stone floors, and the occasional rustle of scrolls being unrolled. One of the great privileges of being a scribe was access to knowledge forbidden to most Egyptians. They read the sacred texts, knew the complex myths of creation, and understood the intricacies of law and governance. But with privilege came secrecy. Revealing the wrong information could mean banishment or worse. In this way, the life of a scribe was a delicate balance of intellect, loyalty, and restraint. There was also a path for ambition. A skilled and loyal scribe could rise to high office, managing estates, overseeing temple treasuries, or even advising the pharaoh himself. Some scribes became governors of regions, their pens having paved their way to power. For those born without noble blood, this was one of the few avenues for true social mobility. Yet perhaps the most profound gift of the scribe's craft was immortality. While most Egyptians could only hope their names would be spoken by descendants for a few generations, the words written by scribes could endure for thousands of years. In a land obsessed with life after death, this was a form of eternal life granted to very few. As we leave the scribe's chamber, the dim glow of the oil lamps flickers in the shadows, casting the shapes of hieroglyphs onto the walls like whispers from another age. Outside, the Nile flows steadily under the golden light of the afternoon sun. A reminder that in Egypt, time was measured not only by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the words carefully preserved for future generations. Soft return of flowing water, chirping birds, and the distant sound of wooden tools striking the earth. The morning sun has risen higher now, gilding the vast floodplains with a warm, golden glow. Along the banks of the Nile, life hums with purposeful energy. Farmers, their linen kilts tucked above the knee, stand ankle-deep in fertile mud. They bend low, sowing seeds with a practiced flick of the wrist, a motion passed down from countless generations before them. The air smells of damp soil and fresh water, mingling with the faint sweetness of flowering papyrus. A rhythmic chant rises above the rustling reeds, work songs timed to keep each row of planters moving in perfect harmony. Oxen plod steadily through the shallow furrows, their hooves splashing with each step, while wooden plows creak under the steady push of the farmer's hands. Every movement here is dictated by the seasons and the river's moods. Too little rain, and the crops will wither. Too much flooding, and months of work will be lost. In ancient Egypt, agriculture is not just a livelihood, it is survival, and the farmer's bond with the Nile is one of devotion and respect. Children, their bare feet coated in silt, follow behind their parents, scattering handfuls of grain into the furrows. Laughter mixes with the low calls to the oxen, and for a moment, the hardships of labor are softened by community and the certainty of the land's return each year. Further upriver, irrigation channels, carefully dug and maintained, divert the Nile's bounty into smaller plots. Wooden shafts swing gently as laborers lift water in buckets and pour it into ditches, ensuring no field is left thirsty. Beyond the fields, a small cluster of mud brick homes stands in the sunlight, their walls painted white to reflect the heat. Smoke curls from an open hearth, and the smell of baking flatbread drifts across the breeze. Women kneel in the shade, grinding grain on large stone querns, their steady motions as integral to the village's life as the sowing in the fields. Life here may seem simple, but every gesture, every seed planted, every drop of water lifted, is part of an unbroken chain stretching back millennia. As the sun climbs toward its zenith, the songs of the farmers mingle with the gentle lap of the Nile, a living heartbeat that sustains not just crops, but an entire civilization. Soon the day's heat will force the workers to rest in the shade, but for now the rhythm continues, timeless, patient, and eternal. In ancient Egypt, death was not seen as an end, but as a transition, a continuation of life in another realm. The duties of the living toward the dead were sacred, rooted in both religious devotion and cultural identity. As the warm wind rolled across the desert, carrying with it the faint scent of lotus blossoms from the Nile, families would prepare for rituals that connected them to their ancestors and the gods themselves. The journey of the deceased began with the careful process of mummification. Skilled embalmers, working in near silence, would treat the body with resins and oils, wrapping it in layers of fine linen. This was not merely preservation, it was an act of devotion. Each wrapping, each amulet placed upon the chest was a prayer in physical form, a plea to the gods for safe passage into the afterlife. Once the physical preparations were complete, the most important spiritual ceremony would begin, the opening of the mouth. This ritual, performed by priests wearing the masks of sacred deities like Anubis, symbolically restored the senses of the deceased, the ability to see, speak, breathe, and eat in the world beyond. Without it, the soul could not interact with the divine realm.
But the most feared and revered moment came after, the weighing of the heart. In the Hall of Two Truths, the soul of the deceased would stand before Osiris, the ruler of the dead. The heart, seat of the person's soul and morality, would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Amet, the terrifying creature part lion, hippopotamus, and crocodile. The soul would then face total annihilation. But if it was light and pure, the deceased would pass into the eternal bliss of the field of reeds. For the living, ensuring the dead reached the afterlife was a duty that transcended generations. Tombs were visited with offerings of food, beer, and incense, for it was believed that without sustenance, the spirits would grow restless. Neglecting these duties could bring misfortune upon the family, a concept both spiritual and deeply practical in a land where ancestral blessings were considered essential for prosperity. And so, in a culture where death was as much a part of life as the rising of the Nile, the sacred duties of the afterlife were never neglected. To fail in them was to sever the bond between the worlds, something no ancient Egyptian could bear to imagine. As the blazing sun dipped toward the horizon over the Nile, the life of a tomb builder began to slow. But for those in the service of the pharaoh's eternal home, the day's end did not bring true rest. There was a sacred rhythm to their existence, one that extended beyond chisels and paintbrushes. Once the finishing touches were placed on a wall or a hieroglyph was filled with powdered lapis, a different kind of work began, the preparation for eternity. The belief in the afterlife was not an abstract concept for these men and women. It was a guiding force in every stroke of the hammer and brush. They were not merely decorating chambers. They were ensuring the safe passage of the pharaoh into the next world, a journey as perilous as it was eternal. And with this knowledge came a solemn burden. Any mistake, no matter how small, could anger the gods or imperil the spirit. At night, while the rest of Egypt settled into slumber, certain trusted artisans remained within the tomb's chambers under flickering oil lamps. These were the master painters, calligraphers, and stonemasons, individuals who had sworn oaths of secrecy. The darkness outside was nothing compared to the shadows within. Here, in the silent corridors, they worked on the most private of decorations, protective spells, hidden sigils, and sacred names meant only for divine eyes. One wrong stroke could erase a name, and to erase a name was to erase a soul from existence. That fear pressed heavily on tired shoulders. The thought of it kept their hands steady, even as exhaustion threatened to loosen their grip. But there was also a personal dimension to this labor. These artisans knew their own lives were fragile. Many had watched their friends collapse under the heat or fall victim to illness. And so, in quiet moments between tasks, they sometimes added tiny, almost invisible markings into the artwork, symbols that might guide their own spirits should they perish before their time. It was a subtle act of defiance against mortality, hidden beneath the weight of royal duty. The final days of work inside a tomb carried an eerie mix of accomplishment and grief.
As the last stone was sealed in place, the workers knew they would never see their creations again. Their art, their sweat, and their very names would be entombed in silence for millennia. But that was the nature of their calling: service without recognition, beauty without witness. And as the entrance was hidden beneath sand and stone, the workers turned their backs to the tomb, walking away into the desert night, knowing they had played their part in securing not just the pharaoh's eternity, but also their own place in the endless story of Egypt. The ancient Egyptians saw life not as an ending, but as the beginning of an eternal voyage. Death was not a conclusion, but a passage, a crossing into the duat, the shadowy underworld where the soul faced trials, temptations, and judgment. Yet this was no gentle transition. According to their beliefs, the afterlife was fraught with dangers, demons, and divine tests that would determine whether your spirit would enjoy eternal peace or be cast into oblivion. For the ordinary Egyptian, preparing for this journey was a lifelong endeavor. Without the right spells, offerings, and divine favor, you would be lost in darkness forever. The journey began with death itself, but the preparation for that moment started long before the final breath. From childhood, Egyptians learned the principles of Ma'at, the cosmic order, truth, and balance. Violating these principles meant carrying the stain of sin into the afterlife, where it could tip the scales against you. Wealthy Egyptians commissioned ornate coffins filled with protective amulets and hired scribes to copy the Book of the Dead, a collection of magic spells designed to protect the soul. Poorer folk relied on symbolic charms or oral recitations learned from priests, but the risks were far greater. In the duat, ignorance was deadly. The first challenge was navigating the rivers of the underworld, guarded by serpents and crocodile-headed demons. Without the proper incantations, you could be swallowed whole or turned to stone. Then came the gates, dozens of them, each with a guardian demanding secret passwords. If you failed to speak the right words, the gate would remain shut, and your soul would wander eternally, cold and alone. The Book of the Dead contained these words, but only if you had the foresight and the wealth to secure them in life. But even if you passed the gates, the ultimate trial awaited: the weighing of the heart. In the Hall of Two Truths, before the god Osiris and 42 divine judges, your heart was placed on a golden scale opposite the feather of Ma'at. If your heart was heavy with lies, cruelty, or corruption, it tipped the balance, and Ammit, a fearsome beast part lion, hippopotamus, and crocodile, would devour it. This was the second death, the complete annihilation of your soul. No reincarnation, no peace, just nothingness. For those who passed, paradise awaited, the field of reeds, a mirror of Egypt's fertile lands, where the Nile's waters shimmered forever and crops never failed. But even there, labor awaited. Farmers still plowed, herders still tended cattle, and servants, often represented by magical Shopti figurines buried with the dead, would carry out the toil in your place. Eternal life was not a life of idleness. It was simply a life free of the suffering and scarcity of the mortal world. In the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, living well was not just about surviving in the present. It was about ensuring a safe passage into eternity. But in truth, few would be truly prepared for the hazards of the duat. For the modern mind, accustomed to thinking of death as an end, the idea of an eternal journey full of monsters, trials, and moral reckoning might be more terrifying than comforting. And yet for them, it was the only way the world made sense: life, death, and the promise of renewal forever bound in the cycle of the Nile. The death of a pharaoh was never simply the end of a reign. It was a cosmic event that rippled through every layer of ancient Egyptian society. From the bustling markets of Thebes to the quiet farms along the Nile, everyone knew the passing of their ruler would set into motion a series of elaborate and sacred rituals, each step meant to guide the pharaoh into the afterlife and secure the balance of the universe. The process began almost immediately after the ruler's last breath. The body was swiftly transported to the House of Purification, where a team of priests and embalmers, men who had trained their entire lives for this sacred duty, would begin the mummification process. The work was conducted in near silence.
save for the soft chanting of prayers to Anubis, the god of mummification. Every cut, every cleansing, every anointing of oil was done with precision, for they believed that if the body was not perfectly preserved, the pharaoh's spirit would wander forever, unable to enter the field of reeds, their version of paradise.
Outside these sacred chambers, the royal architects and labor crews sprang into action. If the pharaoh's tomb was not yet complete, and in many cases it wasn't, the work had to be finished at a frantic pace. Stonecutters carved intricate hieroglyphs onto the walls, recording the pharaoh's life and achievements, while artists painted vivid scenes of hunting, feasting, and divine encounters to ensure the ruler would enjoy all these pleasures in the afterlife. Craftsmen fashioned golden masks, jeweled pectorals, and ceremonial weapons that would be placed alongside the mummy. Each item was more than decoration. It was a magical tool, meant to protect and empower the pharaoh in the journey beyond death. The scale of this undertaking was staggering. Resources were drawn from across the kingdom. Caravans brought cedar wood from Lebanon for the sarcophagus, electrum from Nubia to gild statues, and alabaster for canopic jars. The sheer wealth poured into a single burial was a statement of divine kingship and a warning to the living. The pharaoh's power endured even in death. When the body was ready and the tomb complete, the most sacred of all ceremonies began, the opening of the mouth ritual. This was performed by the high priest, often wearing a mask of Anubis, who would symbolically restore the pharaoh's senses so they could eat, drink, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. The ceremony was attended by the highest officials, generals, and priests, all dressed in linen and adorned with amulets, their heads bowed in reverence. The funeral procession that followed was a spectacle unlike any other. The gilded funerary boat carrying the pharaoh's sarcophagus glided along the Nile, accompanied by barges filled with mourners chanting laments, musicians playing somber melodies, and priests burning incense that curled into the sky. The people lining the riverbanks wept openly, knowing they were witnessing the transition of their god-king into eternity. Finally, deep within the Valley of the Kings, or within a hidden chamber of a grand pyramid, the pharaoh was laid at rest. The tomb was sealed with great stone slabs, the entrance concealed to thwart would-be robbers. Inside, the air would grow still and the treasures would remain untouched, at least in theory, for centuries, waiting for the day when the pharaoh would rise again in the afterlife. In that darkness, surrounded by gold and magic, the ruler would begin their journey through the underworld, facing trials, monsters, and the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at. Only if the scales balanced could the pharaoh take their place among the gods, watching over Egypt for all eternity. The sun dipped low over the Nile, casting long shadows over the river's golden surface. Evening was approaching in ancient Egypt, and with it came the slower, more reflective moments of the day. The air cooled slightly, offering a reprieve from the oppressive heat that had clung to every surface since dawn. Boats, their sails catching the last light of the sun, drifted lazily along the waterway. Fishermen pulled in their final catches, their nets heavy with tilapia and perch, while the scent of grilled fish wafted from small cooking fires along the banks. The Nile was more than just a river. It was a lifeline. Without it, the land would be nothing but barren desert. Its waters brought fertility to the soil, nourished crops, and sustained both human and animal life. The rhythm of the Nile was the rhythm of existence itself. From the great cities near the delta to the quiet villages deep in the south, the Nile connected them all, a silver thread stitching together the patchwork of ancient Egypt's civilization. Evening along the Nile brought with it a sense of quiet unity. Families gathered near the water's edge to wash clothes, bathe children, or simply sit and talk. Farmers, after tending to their fields all day, would often dip their tired feet into the cool water, feeling the current rush past them. Small children splashed and laughed nearby, their carefree joy echoing over the water, blending with the soft sounds of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. For many Egyptians, the river was also a spiritual presence. It was seen as a divine gift from the gods. Hapi, the god of the Nile, was honored with offerings to ensure the floods came each year to replenish the land. Priests would perform sacred rites to thank the gods for the river's bounty, especially during the season of Akhet, the flooding period that made agriculture possible. Without those dependable cycles, there would be famine, drought, and despair. As night descended, the horizon glowed with deep hues of orange and violet. Oil lamps were lit in nearby homes, casting small, flickering beacons of light across the darkness. The river mirrored the night sky, with stars shimmering in its surface, making it feel as though the heavens had descended into the water. Somewhere in the distance, a musician played a slow, haunting melody on a reed flute, the notes weaving in and out of the sound of the gentle current. To live by the Nile was to live in balance with nature's gifts and demands. The people of ancient Egypt knew that their fortunes rose and fell with the river. It could give life, but in seasons of unpredictable flooding or drought, it could also take it away. This awareness created a deep respect, a reverence that guided their traditions, laws, and way of life. In the stillness of the night, the river seemed eternal, a constant in a world that changed only in small, deliberate steps. Pharaohs rose and fell, dynasties ended, and monuments crumbled over centuries, but the Nile endured, flowing on as it always had, as it always would.